Welcome to our module on regular and effective contact. This module will serve as an introduction to the topic of regular and effective contact. In order to begin talking about regular and effective contact, it's useful to explore where we even get the idea of regular and effective contact. And this goes back to the definitions and rules that govern what we do in the online environment. While everyone's very sensitive to and aware of requirements that are related to accreditation, there are rules that have been around that have regulated our activities for a long time and that are useful to look at. So very briefly, we'll cover the definition of distance education in the California Community College system and how this impacts what you do and how you do it. We'll speak specifically about the Title V regulations that relate to distance education, which leads to the requirement of a separate approval process with respect to distance education, and then a little bit about the distance education guidelines that are published by the Chancellor's Office that serve to interpret those Title V regulations. So when we look at definitions of distance education, we have different reasons for defining distance education and, as a consequence, slightly different definitions. We have one definition for reporting purposes, another for apportionment. Locally, we each have our own definitions for our schedules, and then there's another definition with respect to curriculum, more specifically a definition for when separate approval is in fact required. So here's one of the relevant sections of Title V that defines what distance education is. It's instruction in which the instructor and student are separated by distance and interact through the assistance of communication technology. And so we have a whole section within Title V that discusses this, that also reminds us of the importance that our distance education delivery is consistent with guidelines designed to ensure that individuals with disabilities have full access. So in approximately 2008-2009, there were changes made in Title V regulations with respect to distance education. I mention this because if you go back looking at Title V regulations and you happen to go to a document that's older, you may get a little confused and find things. There were two changes during Part 1. The distance education sections were moved and renumbered just to make things clarified, just to make things confusing. And it was clarified that distance education is when more than 50% or 51% and above of a course is to be offered at a distance. Part 1 also was very important in that it clarified that any time you are delivering a course or an element of a course regularly by design, it requires a separate review. It requires that separate approval process. This is important because it means if a course is a hybrid course, it must undergo that separate approval process to ensure that the elements offered by distance education are in fact consistent with the course outline of record and all regulations that are involved. Part 2 was a little different and really focused on trying to fix issues regarding apportionment. These issues were not completely fixed, and it's not clear that they ever will be, but that's a completely different topic. So, funding courses that are distance education, but less than 50% online. In other words, courses that do not meet that definition of distance education as 51% online for reporting purposes, they should use the alternative attendance accounting procedure. So in other words, despite how ubiquitous distance education is today, we still do not have a formula for funding distance education that is designed, in fact, for distance education. We're basically retrofitting an old mechanism. Again, not a topic for today. Course quality standards. It's important to remember that the separate approval process is in place to ensure that the course has the same level of quality as the course offered in the classroom. And so those same standards of quality, if you look back into the Title V regulations regarding courses, also apply when there are courses to be offered during using distance education, and the course approval process is supposed to ensure that. One of the most important pieces of the regulations, and the reason we're here today, is the requirement that we have regular and effective contact between instructor and students. Today, the importance of this, I think, is universally recognized as concerns have arisen regarding courses that are not interactive and that really are merely correspondence courses. Here in California, our Title V regulations have always required that we have regular effective contact between instructor and students. So this is an element in courses that is a good idea for many reasons, that's always been required here in our system, but is now really being recognized everywhere as an important aspect of real distance education. So the separate course approval process is used if any part of the course is designed to be provided through distance education in place of face-to-face interaction. We mention this just because it's important to recognize that it's okay to cancel a course for a day and offer your students an alternative activity that is online, but if you are doing that on a regular basis, then it needs to go through your curricular processes. So, separate approval, part of that process is ensuring that the course meets those guidelines for quality that exist in the curriculum regulations, but it's also a mechanism for ensuring that regular and effective contact between instructor and student is in fact in place as defined locally. So locally, you need to have a policy regarding regular and effective contact. You may or may not have mechanisms for enforcement. These things vary, as so many things do in our colleges. What are some of the advantages of requiring regular and effective contact? I hope at this point in your training that that's obvious, but just to reiterate, the advantages of regular and effective contact ensures that the course is not a correspondence course where a student is merely interacting with course materials and submitting assignments but not actually having the benefit of an instructor. It requires that the course size has to be manageable. You cannot have regular and effective contact with 1,000 students. How big is manageable certainly is something we can debate, but most certainly this does put a limit of some sort on the size of online courses. The appropriate use of regular and effective contact contributes to course integrity. When that regular and effective contact means there is a regular exchange of written information between faculty and between faculty and student, such that the faculty member comes to know the writing of the student, this certainly contributes to course integrity. The ongoing interaction, that regular and effective correspondence between the faculty member and the student, it most certainly will increase student engagement and consequently success. The distance education guidelines further go on to stipulate that locally we are supposed to have a definition of effective contact, and including how often and in what manner instructor-student interaction is achieved. And it's very important to document regular effective contact and how it is achieved. So your course documents should indicate what is going to happen, and then you of course should also make it happen. Since regular effective contact was declared in academic and professional matters, this documentation should include demonstration of a collegial consultation with the academic senate, for example, through its delegation to the local curriculum committee. Most commonly, this means it gets charged as a task to a distance education committee or some sort of instructional technology committee. So, up next, regular and effective contact policies and best practices. See you there.